What do To Kill a Mockingbird, Harry Potter, and Where the Wild Things Are all have in common? Other than being popular children's books, there's something else that these classics share. All three are among the growing list of novels banned in many U.S. school libraries. Whether it be the discussions of racism in To Kill a Mockingbird or the depiction of magic and sorcery in the Harry Potter series, these stories have been deemed inappropriate for children by various interest groups. While controversial books have been challenged in the past, it seems like lately they're facing more opposition than ever before.
Over the past 2 years, we've seen a growing kind of snowball around book bans. It started in Texas with the circulation of lists of books and angry parents and citizens coming to school board meetings demanding the removal and censorship of those books. And then before you knew it, it was happening in many states. You had not only more groups forming with the goal of removing books from schools, but politicians jumping in on this as well. And in some cases, demanding that schools remove certain books, but in other cases, starting to compose and even pass new laws that essentially serve to facilitate or encourage book banning of one kind or another.
That's Jonathan Friedman, Director of Free Expression and Education Programs at PEN America, a nonprofit focused on celebrating literature and protecting free expression. He says that these bans aren't new. In fact, books have faced censorship as far back as the colonial era. However, today, it's reached a different level. A growing number of states, such as Oklahoma, Missouri, and Utah, have all passed book banning legislation. But no state has taken it as far as Florida. The state's Don't Say Gay bill that passed last March bans the discussion of LGBTQ issues for students in third grade and below. This has led to books about gender and sexual orientation being wiped from school libraries, effectively also removing access for kids in higher grades.
Across Florida, many school districts have interpreted this to mean that they have to remove all books with any LGBTQ content whatsoever, particularly from classrooms or even school libraries. And the concern that, a third grader might access one such book and somehow be breaking this law means that, say, a whole elementary school will just take all such books out of their library. There have been school districts in Florida that have suspended all classroom libraries. You have basically classrooms without books that students can read, which is, detrimental to the development of literacy.
On top of banning LGBTQ content, these laws also target books that discuss critical race theory or have sexually explicit content.
There has been a pretty consistent streak of targeting books that have to do with race or racism or American history. This is how you have situations where a biography of Martin Luther King or Rosa Parks could end up banned in a school district for one reason or another. The second set of targeted topics is LGBTQ identities, and that has really ranged from books that are young adult fiction to, say, a children's book that just presents a same-sex couple, even innocuously. They're just, this kid has two moms. People don't want students to have any access to that and knowledge of those identities and families whatsoever. And then the third most prominent theme is about sexual content. There are groups who have long been opposed to sex education in public schools, and some of them have been very heavily involved in drawing attention to this, but also sharing lists of books online that have some kind of sexual content in them and encouraging schools to remove them.
One of these groups is Moms for Liberty, a nonprofit organization that seeks to protect parental rights in education. They've been one of the biggest driving forces behind book banning legislation. One mom, Tia Bess, is a volunteer who joined the group after her daughter checked out a popular fiction book from the school library with a graphic sex scene.
What piqued my interest is when it happened to my own daughter. Because at first I was in denial, like, well, I mean, come on, these people, they're crazy. They're making something from nothing. They're over exaggerating. What's a book going to do? But then my daughter's school, she had a book in her hand that was worse than 50 Shades of Gray, in my opinion. She's 14 years old. In the junior high, she's in middle school. That means this book is available for 11, 12, and 13.
Not only did this raise concern for her daughter, but also for her 7-year-old son with autism. Bess feels that he's not ready to learn about certain topics and also sometimes struggles to read social cues.
My biggest concern is, what about the children who have autism? What about the kids that have special needs? If they see it, they're going to do it. I'm not sheltering my son. I just know that he's not ready for it. He's not ready for it at this time. If I feel that I want him to know, we will first have a sit down talk about it and we'll explore it together.
As for books that discuss LGBTQ and racial issues, Bess believes that they don't need to be banned completely, but should require an adult signature sign-off. As an African American woman and a member of the LGBTQ community herself, Bess adds that it's important that students learn about these topics. However, she prefers that these conversations are had in the privacy of one's home rather than at school. Like many other members of Moms for Liberty, she believes it's a parent's right to control when and how their children learn about these subjects. That's why Bess advocated for Florida House Bill 1467, also known as the K-12 Education Act, which went into effect on January 1st.
Basically, this law requires that books in the elementary classrooms be age appropriate and grade level. I mean, that's very clear for me. If you want more for your child, go to the public library. I support this piece of legislation because I have that child that I can't protect. I can't always be there with him. You know, he's not going to have someone at school with him to tell him, hey, don't read this. That's not appropriate for you. If you're going to put it within hand's reach, it should be appropriate.
On the other hand, Friedman argues that school libraries already have a system in place to make sure students like Bess's son are only accessing age-appropriate content.
A lot of the times people are talking about the issue of age appropriateness, but they don't have necessarily alternative solutions. What you will find is that actually many schools and librarians in particular have developed sensible systems to already adjudicate this. They have ways of seeing what kinds of books are interesting to students at different ages. They are attuned to the fact that two students of the same age can read with vastly different interests and abilities. And so it's actually the purpose of a library to have a wide range of content available. And, you know, anyone who's been a teacher for many years has learned what kinds of topics are age appropriate and developmentally appropriate and how to explain them to students in ways that students can understand.
He adds that by removing books in schools that discuss controversial or sensitive subject matter, we're cutting off young people from forming their own well-rounded opinions. This deletion of information disproportionately silences the voices of minorities, the LGBTQ community, and other vulnerable populations.
What we're seeing in schools right now is that, you know, you can write a law that you might think is narrowly defined, but ultimately it has this bigger chilling effect, and it's leading to schools not purchasing new books for their libraries, not teaching certain topics, cutting off discussions of books, you know, not reading books to kids in classrooms anymore. And so all of this has made every teacher or librarian in many parts of the country basically operate constantly looking over their shoulder and selecting for students, or basically limiting horizons for students to only the most, you know, anodyne content that nobody could possibly object to. This is why the library is so necessary and so important in a diverse democracy, is because it's meant to be a place where anyone can see themselves and their stories in a book, and where they can learn about a diverse range of people who are different from them and, you know, develop empathy and grow as individuals.
But Bess believes that exposing kids to certain books could hinder growth. For example, the book Push, which was turned into the movie Precious, is available at her children's school library. The book discusses sexual assault and teen pregnancy, both of which are topics she doesn't think they're ready to learn about just yet. Plus, she says that stories like Push can be traumatizing and triggering to children who've dealt with these issues at home. For Bess, banning books has nothing to do with political ideologies, but everything to do with protecting her kids.
I want all of my kids to be the best versions of themselves without outside interference. It's not a one-sided argument. It's for both sides of the fence, regardless if you're Democrat, Republican, even if you don't vote at all. We all have kids. We're all parents. We all want to heal generational curses and prevent trauma.
Despite conflicting views on the issue, one thing is for certain. These book bans are escalating to a new level. Before this kind of legislation was introduced, The issue on whether or not to remove a book from a school library was typically handled between parents and school administrators. Now, not only is the government involved, but there are harsh consequences for educators who teach from this forbidden list. And while some parents may feel like shielding their children from certain stories is necessary, others believe it's a threat to free speech, education, and the future of democracy.
This situation is becoming one in which people are trying to institutionalize book banning as a more regular part of schools and more narrowly dictate what can and cannot be taught and thought about in school places. And that's concern when we think about the role of education and public education in particular in a democratic society.
Books are critical in shaping how we see the world, others, and ourselves. Should certain groups and politicians be able to sway so heavily what's stocked on the shelves of school libraries? There are two sides to every argument, and this, no doubt, is an important, ongoing debate. To find out more about this topic and our guests, Jonathan Friedman and Tia Bess, visit viewpointsradio.org. For more behind the scenes, check out Viewpoints Radio on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. This segment was written and produced by Grace Galanti. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. Studio production by Jason Dickey. I'm Marty Peterson. Coming up next week.
When you stretch your supply chains 9,000 miles from Chongqing to New York or from Shanghai to Amsterdam, etc., you create so many linkages, so many transportation lanes, so many handlers, so many things that can go wrong.
The long-term benefits of building a more resilient supply chain system. Then,
people were really interested in cooking thematically. So people would throw yellow dinners and orange dinners and pink dinners.
The Odd Recipes of Early Modern America. I'm Marty Peterson.
and I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows and find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints.